All right, here we go. Today we have former Lucchese mafia made man, Frank Gioia Jr. Welcome to Vlad TV.
Thank you, Vlad. Nice to meet you.
Well, you have a very interesting history, so I want to start in the very beginning. You grew up in Little Italy.
That's right.
So describe Little Italy in the 70s and 80s.
Little Italy was an Italian-American neighborhood, one of the oldest neighborhoods in New York City of the 5 boroughs. Predominantly Roman Catholic, safe place, neighborhood. Everybody looked out for each other, very family orientated.
Okay, so you're growing up in this family. Your mom is a stay-at-home wife, and your dad is doing other stuff. And eventually you find out that he's a made man with the Lucchese mafia. At what point do you actually find that out?
Well, I don't know the stuff that he ever did, but eventually, you get an idea that he was a made guy in one of the families later on in life, in teens, 17, 18 years old.
Okay, and a lot of your family members from both sides actually have mafia connections. Like, for example, your great-grandfather on your mother's side was a made man with the Genovese crime family. So who are some of the other figures in your family that are associated with the mafia?
Well, on both sides. My mother's side had, my grandfather was in a Genovese crime family. Her stepdad was a Lucchese crime family. I had multiple family members that were in different families throughout my life.
Now, this part's a little gray area for me. You have some sort of connection to Vincent Chin Gigante?
Okay, Chin Gigante was married to my dad's first cousin, and I called him uncle. I called him uncle out of respect. I also grew up with his son, very close to his son, sort of like the brother I never had.
Okay, for those that don't know, Chin was the boss of the Genovese crime family.
Well, I didn't know. Back then I was a kid, so I didn't know what he exactly was, if he was a boss or even a member of the mafia. I didn't even know.
Well, he had sort of a very interesting story because at one point, the police were on him and he tried to throw him off by acting crazy. His nickname was the Odd Father or the Enigma in the bathrobe. He would walk around Manhattan with a bathrobe acting crazy, so to try to kind of avoid arrest. Did you see any of that stuff growing up?
No, it's not the guy. The guy that I seen is not what the papers and the TV or what you see on the internet today depicts him of. No.
Okay, so around the age of 12, you started hanging around a social club that was owned by the mob. And, that's when you first started kind of associating with the mob on your own?
Yeah, I pretty much grew up in it. So I was born and raised, you got to understand it's a culture back then. So you don't realize you're doing anything wrong. I really wasn't doing anything wrong, but you grow up around, your family. So you really don't think, it's the culture.
Well, right around middle school, that's when your, career started. You started bookmaking and loan sharking at that point?
Yeah, it's true. I started stealing cars. From cars I went to stick-ups. From there I went to bookmaking, shellocking, and, started learning how to make money in the street.
Okay, so your first got done at what age?
So, when I first got arrested when I was maybe 14 years old, stealing cars. That was my first pinch. And then after that, I didn't get arrested until later on.
Now, in terms of all these, were the older guys kind of coaching you in that, or was it just a bunch of kids that were doing it on their own?
It's kind of, I wanted to be like them. So, I was a good listener. I learned, and I wanted to emulate the guys that was hanging around. So, I wanted to be a gangster. I wanted to make money. I wanted to do all of those things. So,
Well, at one point you started selling marijuana, but then you moved to.
right. So from there, I wanted to make more money. And the way to make bigger money was to deal. So I started with marijuana. Then from there, I moved into, and then after that, ultimately, I moved into.
Okay, and you would get the from the triads.
Yeah, I dealt with a Chinese out of Chinatown, off of Mott Street, that I was good friends with, and that was my connection.
Okay, so you'd get it from the Chinese gangs, and you would sell it to the Puerto Ricans.
Well, yeah, I had a crew of, again, these are guys that I grew up with and I knew. So one guy happened to be Puerto Rican, and he had another crew of guys that ran a bunch of the blocks in the Lower East Side and Boston, out of state.
Okay, so between all these, at this point in your life, you're around 18 years old. The stick-ups, the car robberies, the drug dealing, were you getting arrested at all, or were you kind of under the radar?
Kind of under the radar. I had heat, I was under surveillance quite a bit, stuff like that, but never didn't take a pinch yet. No, didn't get arrested.
Okay, so at what point did you start getting closer to the Lucchese crime family? Because, like we said earlier, your dad was a made man.
Correct. So my father was a made guy with a certain faction of the Lucchese family. I then got close with a different faction of the Lucchese family, which was the Brooklyn crew in Bensonhurst.
Well, with your dad being a made man, did he want you to get into that life? And could you have just gone through your dad to be a made man yourself, or did he not want that for you?
My father never wanted that for me. I don't think any dad should want that for their kids. But my father was dead against it, never wanted that life for me. But I guess he couldn't stop it either. He was inactive for a long time. So he really had no say whether to, he had no say in it. So he really couldn't stop it.
Okay, so now you're hanging out with the Lucchese's on the Brooklyn side of things, and a situation happened with a bouncer.
That's right.
Talk about that.
Well, I was close with another made guy from the Lucchese family out of the Bronx faction. His name was John Petroselli. And John Petroselli was in a nightclub up in Westchester somewhere one night, and this bouncer disrespected him by throwing him out of the place, whatever he did. John had come down to Little Italy and asked me if I would do him a favor to shoot the guy, not to kill him, just to shoot him in the leg. So I told him I would do it for him. We went up to Westchester, he pointed the guy out, and I capped him in the leg.
Okay. Have you ever shot anyone before at this point?
Yes. I've shot people before that, and I shot at people, but nobody died. Thank God nobody died.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before that situation, you've actually shot at people. What were those situations around?
Well, they were beefs that a cousin of mine had. It was a problem maybe that I had. It was my own stuff. I had a cousin that was being held hostage in a project because he was dating this girl, and there was a bunch of kids downstairs getting ready to beat him up with bats and stuff like, So he called me up, and I went there and, shot at all the kids, all the guys over there were getting ready to beat him up, and got him in the car and get him out of that neighborhood. Another friend of mine called me up. He had a problem. I went and shot at a couple of people to get him out of the situation. So it was stuff, it was shootings I was involved in, but not mob related. It was either a problem that I had on my own, or a problem that a cousin of mine had, or a friend of mine had that called me for help.
Okay. So by the end of your teens, you were actually used to shooting your gun multiple times.
Yes.
During any of those instances, did the police ever come arrest you? Did anyone point you out? Anything else like that?
No, I never got caught. The closest time was when I was in a nightclub, and my girl was we were in a VIP lounge, my girl was going to the bathroom, and the guy made a pass at her, and I decided to pull a gun out and threw a shot at his head. Luckily, she pushed my hand, so just missed his head, and that was the closest it came because I almost got caught for that one because it was a packed nightclub. But I was lucky to get out. The bouncers knew me, everybody knew me in the place.
Okay, so by 1991, you actually become a made man in the Lucchese family. Now, that's a very big deal. Like, what led up to you actually becoming a made man? You were like an associate leading up to it?
That's right, yeah. I was an associate that was on record with the Brooklyn crew. Mainly Vic and Gaspipe, Vic Amuso and Anthony Castro.
Okay, so being an associate for the Luccheses, what type of stuff were you doing for them, and what made them feel confident that, okay, this guy should be a made man?
Broke some arms and legs for them. Went and would go on a hit for them. Would pretty much do anything that they wanted done. So they knew I was ready to go, whatever they needed me for.
Okay, so breaking of the arms and legs. Can you talk about those situations?
Yeah, there was a time where another crime family beat one of our guys up, an associate, beat him up really bad, put him in the hospital. So Gaspipe had told us that we need to go back and get even for him. And it so happened there were two guys when we went, and we went in there and I broke their both arms and legs with a pipe.
Okay. What about going along on hits?
Well, there was one hit that I was on, couple of hits, but I pled guilty to all of that stuff. I don't think we have enough time in the interview to go through everything. I'm going to be getting into it more in depth on my podcast. People tune in and stuff, Frankie Gioia Jr. podcast. So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I pled guilty to it, RICO murders and conspiracy to murders, and did my time. But to go over each stuff is kind of, we don't have enough time for it.
Okay, fair enough. So, like I said, 1991, you become a made man in the Lucchese crime family. You went through the whole ceremony with the pricking your finger and so forth?
Yeah.
How did it feel to walk out of that ceremony a made man for Lucchese's?
I'll be honest with you, I didn't feel any different. I thought I would. I thought I would feel this, difference, but, I really didn't feel any different.
Okay, but although you don't feel different, you are different. You're a made man. People can't just do things to you without getting permission, and you now could build up your own crew that kicks up to you, and then you have to kick up also to your boss, right?
Honestly, I never kicked up. They never asked me either. I had a really good captain at the time, George Zappola, and I had an acting captain, little Georgie Conti. We did things together. It wasn't where I had to kick up to them, where they demanded anything from me. So that's not always the case. A lot of guys do. You'll hear stories that guys do, but I never had to.
Well, at the time that you became a made man for the Lucchese's, they were at war with the Gambinos. So you no longer being an associate, being an actual made man, you're now a target, and you're also expected to join into this war. So describe what this time was like.
Well, I don't think it wasn't an official war. It was kind of a lot of sneaking was going on. So it wasn't an all-out official war. The two families declared war. We were sneaking their guys. So they didn't know where it was coming from. I guess later on they had an idea where it was coming from. But yeah, we were killing off their guys.
During this time, how many Gambinos actually died?
I would say 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. But key guys. You know, you're talking about captains and key guys that were real gangsters and with the Gambinos.
Okay. And how many Lucchese's were getting killed during this time?
None of us. Like I said,
Okay, so it was one-sided.
Yeah, it was a one-sided war. So we were kind of, you know, nothing was on record. Nothing was officially said that we're going to war and we're going to, you know, it's our guys against your guys. It was more like we're going to sneak you and, you know, you don't know where it's coming from. Just as long as we don't get caught.
Well, this was before the time you became a made man, but was there a situation in 1986 that the Lucchese's tried to kill John Gotti, who was the boss of the Gambinos at the time, with a car bomb?
Yeah, they did. They tried to kill John Gotti coming out of a club. They got his underboss, Frankie the and actually one of our guys got hurt. Frankie Hart was a made guy with us, and he got hurt in that car bombing as well. But he didn't know it came from the Lucchese's, his own family.
Okay. Well, there was a situation where your sister had a popular hair salon in Tribeca. You know, Cyndi Lauper was a client, Bette Midler was a client, and then one of her former employees started a competing hair salon a couple blocks away, and that set off a chain of events. Can you describe that?
Yeah, my sister had a nice state-of-the-art beauty salon in Tribeca. All these celebrity clients were coming to her. It was in the American Express building. And like you said, competition. They wanted to go down the block, 3 blocks down to open up a beauty salon. And I decided to take it out.
Okay. By take it out, you threw a Molotov cocktail into the salon.
Well, eventually I did. What I did was I tried to talk to her through the employees. I told the employee that I was friends with her, say, hey, it's not a good idea for you to open this place. It's not right, you know, trying to poach our workers and recruit our workers. She was very actively in trying to steal our business. And so that talk didn't work. After that, I typed an anonymous letter. I shoved it under her door. Also getting a little more firm with her, saying, hey, this is not a good idea for you to do this. You know, things could happen. There'll be consequences. And then she didn't listen to that. And then ultimately she opened, and then I firebombed the place. Well, I made sure the place was closed. Nobody got hurt. I made a Molotov cocktail. I threw it through the window and firebombed it. And then after that, she got the message. From what I understand, she got an insurance check for $30,000 and never opened the store.
Did your sister know that you were behind that firebombing?
She didn't know beforehand I was going to do it. Nobody in my family did. I didn't say anything to anybody, so they weren't aware of it. And then after it, I never admitted it to anybody. She kind of, I mean, they were guessing, but no, there was no proof. There was no, I didn't tell them that I did it or anything like that. They didn't figure it out.
I mean, during this time, your dad is still a made man with Lucchese's, but he's basically retired at that point?
Yeah, my father had a brother. He has 5 brothers. One brother who was the closest to him in particular was killed. He was shot 11 times and stuffed in a trunk, and he was missing for 10 days. So my father really took that bad, and he grieved for a lot of years. And with that, he was inactive up until I was a made guy, then after. So the answer to your question is, yeah, he was inactive at the time. He wasn't involved in anything.
Were you having conversations with him? Because now you're a made man and now you're active while he's inactive. Was he trying to talk you out of it? Was he trying to give you direction? Or was there a relationship with your dad during this time?
Me and my dad were in 2 different crews. He was with the Prince Street crew, and I was with the Bensonhurst crew. So we never had any mob dealings or talk or discussions because every crew was doing different things. So no, we never really traded notes, or he didn't get involved with my crew, I didn't get involved with his crew.
1992. Prior to that, you've been in various shootouts, but everything changed when a situation happened with Frankie the Blonde Mariconda. So describe the situation.
Well, I had a cousin of mine from Brooklyn. Well, not really cousins. He called me cousin. He had a problem with Frankie the Blonde because Frankie the Blonde made a pass at his girlfriend that was in a nightclub. And basically what he did was he went over to her and said, "Hey, are you still going out with Frank?" She says, "Yeah, I'm still with Frank." And he said, "Well, why don't you go out with a real man?" Well, she came back and told him, and then he wanted to kill him. So he came to me for help.
Right. And just to put it in perspective, Mariconda was an associate with the Gambinos.
Yeah, he was associated with the Gambinos.
Right. But not actually a made man with the Gambinos.
He wasn't a made man at the time, but he was due to be. Frankie the Blonde, he used to like to drink and, party a little bit. But he was a very capable guy. He would have been a guy, eventually he would have been a made guy. But at the time, he wasn't.
Okay, so your cousin said he wanted Frankie the Blonde dead. So you went to your head guy in the Lucchese's, George Zappola, who was the captain at the time, to ask for permission.
Well, I wasn't okay with killing a guy over a girl, and I had no problem with Frankie the Blonde. It was his issue. I felt that his girl, what was your girlfriend doing in the nightclub to begin with? If she's going out with you, she shouldn't be out partying in a club. And two, why is she even coming back and telling you that? So I never agreed with it. And I said, I'm not going to do anything without my captain knowing, not thinking that he would ever get the approval to do it. And he brought it to Georgie Neck, who was on the lam at the time, America's Most Wanted. So we were harboring him. And then he got the okay. And I wanted to verify it myself. And it was approved and, ready to go.
Okay, so you and your cousin essentially start on the mission to kill Frankie the Blonde.
Right.
So describe what happens next.
It's really hard for me to talk about it because that's not me anymore. I do have a lot of remorse and regret over the things that I've done. At the time, Frankie Mariconda was 32 years old. I have a son now that's 32 years old. And I can never imagine if that ever happened to my kid. At the end of the day, Frankie Mariconda should have never got killed. It was for a very stupid reason. He was a good man, come from a good family. He was a tough guy. And he fought. He fought like a man. Me and Frankie, my cousin, Bones, we killed him. I pled guilty to it. I did my time for it. And he's dead. And I regret it. I don't want to get into the methods.
So by 1993, you had a gun connection that can get you any gun or bomb. And you guys had a big hit list back then. The Lucchese's were killing Gambinos, and, essentially, what type of weapons were you getting during this time? Because guns I can understand, but you're actually getting bombs as well?
Yeah, I was actually getting remote control bombs.
Okay. So this is like C4, or how are these bombs actually put together?
Well, my connection was an Israeli guy. And I don't know what it was made of, but they were remote control bombs at the time. With a remote control. So you had to wire it up. You had to wire it, make sure the wires were connected, the right wires, and make sure you were a certain distance from the target for it to work. So yeah, I had access to those and any other firearm that I wanted. Uzi machine guns, shotguns, silencers, automatics, everything. AK-47s, M16s.
Did you yourself ever detonate a bomb?
I tried to, yeah. But it didn't work because the guy who was responsible for putting the wires together put the two wrong wires in different spots. So the answer to your question is yes, I tried to detonate a bomb. I stuck it on a guy's car and we tried to detonate it, but it wasn't working. And then when we got the bomb back, we found out that he cross-wired it. So, well, thank God he did. So,
Okay.
Well, thank God he did.
Yeah. Well, after the whole situation with Frankie the Blonde, you had these guns, and you and your cousin Frankie, a lot of Frankies, by the way, in this life I see, you guys got into a stolen car with a bunch of guns to carry out a hit, but you ended up getting pulled over.
That was a different hit. That's when we got arrested. Yeah, so.
Right. Can you say who you were trying to hit at that point or no?
Just to get into it with you a little bit, we were going on another hit. There was a guy, an associate of ours, who was responsible for stealing a car. He didn't look behind his rearview mirror. He parked the car. We went there to go get the car, stolen car, because that's the hit car, and we had a crash car. And the FBI was laying on the car the day before and arrested us. And I had a .38 caliber. I always carried a gun with me every day. Didn't get the real equipment. The real equipment was back in Brooklyn, where I had machine guns waiting to go back to do the hit. Luckily, we got arrested because we probably would have got killed.
Well, you get arrested for the gun, but then you end up catching a federal case for a heroin trafficking ring.
Right. So while I was out on bail fighting the gun case, I get arrested with the DEA with a federal drug case from Manhattan to Boston, Southern District.
By this time, how big was your drug operation?
How big?
Yeah.
I would say back then I was probably making 50 to 100,000 a week.
Okay. And were you still getting the drugs from the triads, or did you have different connects at that point?
I had to connect with Colombians for cocaine, but mostly the heroin was come from the Chinese. So I would get the Chinese bricks. They were £1.50 packages. And we would break them up, and I would send them up to Boston, and we'd get much more money for it out of state.
I mean, when you talk about hard drugs, I mean, marijuana, usually not a lot of violence that goes with it. But you talk about cocaine, especially heroin, you see a lot of violence. You see a lot of rip-offs, kick doors, and so forth. Now, during the time that you had your drug operation, were there any, deals gone bad, people ripping you off and so forth, or was everyone pretty much scared of the Lucchese's and left you alone?
No, Lucchese, you can't deal drugs when you're in the mob. So that's a cardinal rule. I broke that rule, and I was dealing drugs. I wasn't supposed to. So you don't advertise. Never once did I mention the Lucchese's. Never once did I mention I was a made guy. I just did it off of my reputation. So everybody pretty much was in line. One time, eventually it went bad, the relationship with my Puerto Rican friend, who, there was like $400,000 or $500,000 that he didn't pay. So eventually, yeah, there were mishaps where things went wrong, where his guy stole from him, or, it's kind of like a chain reaction. So it was guys underneath him that stole from him, and then eventually, he couldn't pay me, so it was like a trickle up,
Okay, so in that situation, your guy owes you $500,000. What do you do about that?
Well, I tried to work it out with him where he would pay me back. And at that time, he was having a lot of problems up there. He wasn't able to pay back. And it started pissing me off, and tried to kill him.
What happened?
I was sitting in the car with him. He caught the move. Luckily, he caught the move. He jumped out of the car, started running. I started throwing shots at him, and he got away.
So you never got that $500,000 though?
No, it's still, no. Yeah. I see your point. Either way, I'm not getting paid. So, but back then I had no conscience. I just wanted to get even at that point.
Okay. So now you're arrested by the feds for this drug operations you've been running for a while. And originally you're facing a life sentence and you get denied bail. So what was it like? I mean, you're what, 26 years old, facing life? How do you get your head around that, sitting in that cell?
Well, the charges were 10 to life. So it was minimum mandatory 10 years to life. But the weight on the table, the federal guidelines have a table of weight. And the weight involved is what pushed it up to 30 years. So I had a gun charge that was pending, which was only like a year to 3 years. And then I had the 10 to life, which the drug table had, because of the weight and the poundages, over 2 years, added up to 30 years. And then I got hit with the state, facing another 7.5 to 15. So wrapping my head around it, I had my lawyer going to negotiate a plea deal with all 3 districts. So Southern District of Manhattan, Southern District of Boston, and the gun case in the Brooklyn DA's office.
Okay, so you're sitting in jail with all these pending charges. In the worst case, you have life. Because keep in mind, you could have 10 to life. I mean, I know of people who got 3 to life and end up doing life. Like that's a real thing. You can keep getting denied over and over again, even if it's only 3 years. It could, and I've interviewed people, they got 3 years, and got out. But you don't know what's going to happen. So there's a lot of pressure over spending the rest of your life in prison. Okay, so while you were locked up, the Lucchese underboss, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, was also locked up. And there was a crazy situation where he actually snuck a gun into the jail.
Right. So he had a lot of cops on payroll. We were together in MCC on 7th South. We were cellies. We were cellmates. He was really pissed off with the new administration that was out there, because there was a lot of internal fighting going on amongst the Lucchese family. And he was waiting for one of them to come on the floor to shoot him.
So he was going to shoot inmates inside the jail.
Well, he told me, when so-and-so comes in, we're going to shoot them. And I said, what are we going to shoot him with, our finger? And he says, no, I got a pistol. And I'm like, no, you don't. He says, yeah, I have it in the exercise bike. So he walks over to the bike. It was apart, like in 2 or 3 pieces. We took it back to the cell and, covered the window so nobody could see, and put it all together. And there it was, 25 Beretta, 6-shot clip. So he said, when they come on this floor, we're going to shoot them.
How crazy did this sound? Like your underboss is telling you that you guys are going to shoot a bunch of inmates inside the actual jail.
Yeah, but, you got to understand, at that time I was very insensitive to, I was shocked but not surprised coming from Gaspipe. So.
Okay, and I guess the plan was after these guys got shot that you and Gaspipe would actually escape the jail?
No, obviously not. Probably would be a life or maybe a death sentence. It would have been really bad if that would have happened.
Okay, so ultimately, why didn't the shooting occur?
The shooting never occurred because they never came on the floor. But
okay, but you were actually ready to do it right there in the federal holding facility.
Well, I couldn't stop them. I was there. I would have been there. If they would have walked in at that time and he was going to pick up a gun and start shooting them, yeah, I would have been in the middle of it, but luckily he didn't.
Okay. So that doesn't happen, and you're still in jail awaiting all those charges. And right around 1994, you're 27 at the time, your cousin, Vincent Solinardi, a.k.a. Egghead, gave you some very startling information. Talk about this.
Vincent Solinardi is a blood cousin of mine, real cousin. who I left on the street as an associate of Lucchese family. Eventually, he did get made. He came to see me and said, they want to whack your father. And I just lost it. And you don't go to the mob. You know, if you go to the mob and you ask them, hey, you want to kill my father? What do you think the answer is going to be? No. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Right? So what do you do?
Yeah.
What do you do? What do you do, Vlad? What do you do in that situation? Somebody comes to you, you're in there. Listen, you're in there for your own beef. You're not in there for any mob stuff yet, okay? You're on the boss flips, captains are flipping, everybody's flipping. Now forget that. You're negotiating a plea for your own stuff. You're taking responsibility for your own stuff. You didn't ask for nothing. You didn't ask them for nothing. Nothing. Now they want to kill your father for whatever stupid reason, okay? What do you do?
Well, let's rewind for a second. Your dad is still a made man in the Lucchese's. What exactly prompted the Lucchese's to want to kill your father?
I have no clue. None whatsoever. Because at that time, everybody was getting sneaked. We snuck people. They snuck people. We didn't play by the rules. In the mob, made guy to made guy, we didn't play by the rules. So do you think I trusted who was ever out there to play by the rules? So when somebody comes and tells you they want to kill your father, okay, who I love more than life, what would you do?
Oh, listen, I get it. I get it. You would do whatever it takes to try to save your father. But, according to my notes, the whole hit on your father was over a money dispute?
No, again, that's another thing that's out there that's not true.
I guess my question is this. How accurate do you think this information really was? If I knew that your father was getting killed, I don't know if I would tell you, especially in prison, knowing what the repercussions are. And why would Egghead even know that your father was going to be killed? You see what I'm saying? It's a very weird type of situation.
Very good question. So what I did was, I did my own due diligence, what I had. I called my father to come see me. And I wanted to see if he was feeling anything, if he was getting any strange phone calls, getting called to meetings and stuff like that. So there was a period of time that went by, a couple of weeks, where I told him, I says, hey, watch your back. It's going to be your best friend that's going to call you up to dinner. That's how they do it. Don't answer no calls. Don't go to no meetings. Don't go nowhere. Well, 2 weeks later, he started getting those phone calls. He started getting those meetings. Like, why would you want to meet? You understand? And then I called my cousin back up again. And I said, listen, you realize what you're telling me? Because if I was on the street, that would have happened. Because they knew they would have had to kill me too. Or I would have killed them if I heard about it. But he said, cuz, I'm telling you, he said, and I'm asking him, how do you know this? How do you know? How do you know for sure? He just told me, so I'm telling you, it's going to happen. They're setting it up.
Okay. And the person that gave this hit was the boss of the Lucchese's at the time?
At the time, there was a new administration. So it was no more gas pipe. See, when I was made, it was gas pipe. So I was on the gas pipes regime. It was gas pipe, Georgie Neck. Those guys were gone. They were out of the picture. It was a new administration.
Okay. So you didn't know the boss at all at that point?
No. I knew who he was, but I didn't have a relationship with him.
Okay. And who was the acting boss at that time?
Well, Vic was always the official boss, but he had a street panel of 3 guys. But again, Nobody plays by the rules. In a normal, well, not normal, but in the mob, they would have to have a good reason to kill a guy. It would have to go through a approval process, and then it gets carried out. Lucchese's weren't doing that. Nobody was playing by the rules. They just pull up one night and just clip you. And that's it. As long as the guy don't get caught. Now they don't know who did it. Somebody copped a sneak on him. It could have been a beef that came from anywhere.
Okay, so you are given the word that your father is going to get killed. You are a made man in the Lucchese's. And like we talked about earlier, you took a pledge that you would never cooperate with the police, that you would do whatever it takes if your mother was dying on her deathbed and you got a call from your boss that you would go see them and so forth. So now you are breaking the oath that you originally gave when you became a made man. How long of a process did it take you where you finally said, okay, I'm going to cooperate? Let's get this started.
Let's make it very clear. I didn't plan to be a rat. I didn't plan to rat my friends out. Okay? I went against every fiber and belief system I ever had in my life. Okay? But once you do that and cross the line with my family, the gloves are off. You break the rules, fuck you. Now I'm going to break the rule.
I agree with you. At the end of the day, I feel that if you get involved in a life of crime, eventually there's going to be reasons to cooperate. And I feel like most people in that life cooperate in one way or another if given enough time. For a long time, there had never been any mafia bosses that cooperated. And then mafia bosses started to cooperate. So this kind of goes, I feel like it's more the rule than the exception at the end of the day. So what was it like to actually sit down and cooperate for the first time?
It was, it was a weird feeling. It was a terrible feeling because you're sitting with people that you were raised to despise and you were raised to, look down upon. But then eventually you learn that these people are good people. They're just like us. They just chose a different path. So in the beginning, yeah, it was rough. It was very rough.
I mean, leading up to this point, when you were on the street, had you ever planned a hit against someone who was cooperating? And was that ever a reason to kill someone on the street?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's one of the rules in the mafia why you should get killed. There's only a few rules why a person should get killed. I mean, let's put it this way. Let's be realistic. Nobody should get killed. Let's make that clear. But we're talking about an organization. We're talking about the mafia now, right? We're talking about the mob. In that life, there's only a few reasons why a person should actually legitimately get killed if you break certain rules. Guys were getting killed when I was around. Guys were getting killed for nothing. Guys were getting killed on stuff they were just making up just because they didn't like a guy, because they were jealous of a guy, or they wanted to spite somebody, or they wanted to do something. It was all it was a self problem. It wasn't a rule that they broke.
Well, I mean, without going into any details, did you yourself ever go on a hit to kill somebody who had cooperated?
Yes.
Okay. So you have total understanding that once you cooperate, you now have a green light by the Lucchese Mafia to kill you.
Absolutely. And I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I'm okay with that because you know why? Call me a rat, call me whatever you want. You're not calling me to my father's funeral.
How long after cooperating does your family actually get new identities and put into the witness protection program?
Well, the whole part of my deal was the number one reason was that my father would be protected with my family. That was number one. That's all I wanted. I pled guilty to life. There's no guarantees. People think you get a guarantee, everybody's going to get 5 years, if you cooperate, or if you cooperate, you're going to go home. It doesn't work like that. I hear guys get on even your show, and they say, oh, as long as you just talk, you go home. It doesn't work like that. There's a lot more to it.
Well, yeah, when you sign a cooperation deal, the only thing that you get guaranteed is that the prosecutors will actually go in front of the judge and say, that this person cooperated and helped in the case, and we're asking for leniency in the sentencing. But it's still up to the judge to decide. Sometimes it goes good, sometimes it goes bad, but it definitely helps out in the sentencing most of the time, right?
You plead guilty to the most serious crimes that you committed. You go in front of a judge. Like me, I had to plead guilty to RICO murder, and everything else fell underneath that. I had to go plead guilty to life. And what you're talking about is called a 5K1 letter. As long as your cooperation goes and everything goes, and again, there's a lot of navigating through it. It's not that easy. If everything goes good, they'll write a letter to the judge asking the judge to depart from the guidelines. And then after that, it's up to the judge. They don't promise you you're going to go home. They don't promise you you're going to get 5 years, 2 years. That's all. There is no promise. You got to be forthcoming and you got to cooperate. But a lot of times it goes wrong.
At the point that you start cooperating, do they put you in a separate section?
Yeah, you go to a WITSEC unit. So it's called a Witness Security Unit.
Got it. So you're basically with people who also cooperated, right?
Yes, everybody there cooperated on some level. And again, there's a lot of different levels of cooperation.
Okay, so you start cooperating, you get put in a security area, and you shared a cell with a couple of interesting people, one of which was Carlos Slater, who was the co-founder of the Medellin cartel.
That's right.
How did that relationship go?
It went good. Carlos was a very intelligent guy. He was fluent in several languages, had a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience. He's a normal guy. He's a good guy to do time with.
Okay, but he was also the co-founder of one of the biggest drug empires on earth.
Well, he was accomplished, right? In his game, he was accomplished. So you got to give the guy some kind of credit.
Okay.
I always try to look for good in people. I always try to look good in people first,
Well, I actually looked it up. At one point at his height, he was worth $2.7 billion. So this is not your typical street dealer here. This is someone who's functioning on a global billionaire level.
It's true. We were cellmates for probably, about a year and a half. He became a good friend.
Another person you were locked up with was Nicky Barnes, who was one of the Harlem kingpins at the time.
Right. Another accomplished guy. Well, we weren't cellmates. We were in the same. We weren't cellmates. We were in the same prison, and we worked in the kitchen together.
Right. Nicky Barnes, a.k.a. Mr. Untouchable.
Superfly, yeah.
Okay. So while you're locked up, you have a fiance on the outside. But then at one point, she starts to secretly record your phone calls.
That's right.
Talk about what happened.
Well, she did something really stupid. Recorded my phone calls for the defense on one of the cases I testified in. And she did it for money.
Why would she do that?
For money.
Okay, so the mob was actually paying her to record these phone calls. And this is a big violation, which could have actually gotten you kicked out of the witness protection program.
That's right. It almost did, actually.
Okay. And how did you end up staying in the program eventually?
Yeah, eventually they decided not to breach my agreement and keep me in the program.
Well, you provided information about 6 unsolved murders that were actually committed by your fiance's brother and associates.
That's not true.
Okay, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know who you're talking about. That's not all true.
Okay, can you explain then?
They had already known the crimes. I tried to get her brother out of jail originally. He was in jail he was innocent on a drug charge for 15 to life that he was actually innocent of. They already knew the information. It was a cousin of theirs, Michael Salone, who actually led to the cases against our brother. Her brother wound up cooperating anyways.
Okay, so you're waiting in jail, you agree to cooperate, but you haven't taken the stand yet. And then in 1998, you testify in your first court case. And this was against Lucchese associate Michael Baldy Mike Spinelli and his brother Robert Spinelli.
Right.
So did you know both these guys, Baldy Mike and Robert?
Yeah, of course I did, yeah.
Okay, so it's one thing to meet with law enforcement and give some statements and sign some documents, but actually walking into a courtroom, taking the stand, pointing your finger and say, yes, this person did this crime and so forth, because this was a serious case. I guess the 2 brothers were charged with trying to kill the sister of Lucchese informant Peter Chiodo, right?
Right.
So describe actually walking into that courtroom, and like you said, every fiber of your being is against cooperating, but now you're taking the stand publicly and actually cooperating against people that you know.
It was a very, very tough thing to do. You know, it's you walk in that courtroom and everybody's looking at you. You can hear a pin drop. And at some point, you're saying to yourself, what the fuck am I doing here? You know? Sometimes you want to not even be alive, you know? So it's that I don't pride myself on that, and it's not a good feeling to testify against anybody. But again, my focus was my dad. That's it. My father and my family. That's it. That's all that mattered.
So when you take the stand, was Baldy Mike and Robert Spinelli actually sitting in the courtroom looking at you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and everybody else, the jury, the judge, people in the stands, the marshals, everybody's looking at you. Like I said, the spotlight's on you.
Right, but you're only testifying against 2 people. Everyone else is just there because they're doing their job. So what was it like to make eye contact with your former friends who you're now testifying against?
Like I said, it was a terrible feeling, you know, that never planned to do, never prided myself on doing, and never want to do again. So to be honest with you, no, I never thought I would be in that position. Never, ever in my life did I ever think I would be in that position.
After you took the stand and ultimately it went to the jury, were they both found guilty?
Yeah, they were found guilty.
So knowing that you contributed to 2 people being found guilty, how did you feel afterwards?
Well, like I said, I didn't feel anything really, because they had a choice too. They had choices to make. They could have pled guilty. They could have cooperated themselves. I think eventually Robert Spinelli did go on to cooperate after that case. But they could have made choices just like I did. They could have sat down with the government. They could have cooperated. So I look at it and say, well, if that's the choice they made, that's the consequence. So I didn't feel either way.
So you actually testified in other cases as well, one of which was Tony Franzese, whose real name is actually Tony Gonzalez, who had killed a cop. So talk about that situation.
So Tony Gonzalez, a.k.a. Tony Francese, was a cousin, started out as a cousin of my ex-fiance's cousin, and then became the uncle.
Okay. And what did you actually testify on?
Well, at the time, my fiance's father was working on a construction site, and they found him dead. And the family believed that he was killed, that he didn't fall through a hole. They felt that he was killed. So I wanted to get even for him. I was putting together a hit team to take out somebody in the Gambino family, an associate of the Gambino family, because it was ran by the Gambinos. And then Tony came to me and wanted to be part of my hit team and was telling me how capable he was, that he killed this cop years ago, and he was trying to prove to me that he's capable of coming on, and helping me. I don't know why he was telling me. He was just trying to impress me. He just told me the guy's name, how he did it, the whole thing. So that's how I learned about it.
Well, like Michael Franzese, he's a regular on my show. And his father is Sonny Franzese, who was an underboss at one point. And the one thing that Michael had said multiple times on my show was that when it came to the mafia and murders, at the point that you do it, you never talk about it again. So you can go on a hit with someone, and the next day you could talk about that guy on the hit, and he'll say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Was that the case in general? And why were guys like Tony Gonzalez bragging about people they killed, especially a cop?
Well, first off, Tony Gonzalez was not in the mafia. He was not even associated with the mob. So he could tell whoever he wants about it. What you're talking about is somebody's in the mob. Yeah, you're not supposed to, Michael Francese's right. You're not supposed to discuss another murder with anybody. But that's not always the case. A lot of guys talk and trade notes, and it happens all the time. Guys do talk about murders. Guys do brag about murders, and they talk about work and pieces of work they've been on and stuff like that. There's a lot of guys who brag about it that are in the mob.
Well, ultimately, Tony Gonzalez got convicted for the killing of the NYPD cop. And they were saying that Rudy Giuliani actually wanted to personally thank you for helping out on the case. Did that ever happen?
No, he never did. That's what I was told. I was told that this cop murder has been unsolved for the past 20 years. It was the only unsolved cop murder in New York City. And they were very ecstatic about it. And Giuliani, at that time, was the head of the police and wanted to come down to personally thank me for helping solve the case.
Well, they say that your testimony against the mob and drug dealers resulted in more than 70 convictions. Does that sound right, or does that number sound inflated?
I didn't take a count myself. They say 70, they say more than 70. I really can't tell you. I can't give you a number.
Well, they also say that the former FBI director, James Comey, actually said that your cooperation really helped establish his reputation and allowed him to kind of move up the ranks.
Okay, I think it's a stretch, but okay. Should I say thank you, or I don't know what to say to that.
When it was all said and done, after you took the stand multiple times, after you gave the information that you gave, like some of the people who you cooperated against were potentially involved in the hit on your father, but when you look at 70 people, I would assume that the majority of them really had nothing to do with putting a hit on your father and really had no animosity towards you, didn't do anything to you directly. How did you ultimately live, with yourself in terms of what you did and putting people behind bars? And look, I understand they chose their life and they took, they're getting the repercussions based on their decisions. But in terms of your role with people you didn't have any beef with, how did you take that at the end of the day?
Okay, so when you cooperate, you go into an agreement with the real mafia. The real mob is the government. That's the real mob.
Right.
Okay? And you learn real quick who the real mob is. When you decide to cooperate, you might try to go in there and pick and choose and just say, I'm going to talk about this guy and not talk about that guy. That's not how it works. They usually know the answers before they ask you the questions. Okay, so let's get that straight. There's more rats on the street than there is in the program. So they already know the answers before they ask you. They want to see if you're lying. You have to go in there, you have to tell everything that you did and who you did it with. So you're under an agreement. You're under your cooperation agreement. I give the information. If the agent's able to go out and convict 100 people, it's not like I came in and said, I have 100 people to give up. I don't even know what information I have. It's not my job. It's not my job to put cases together. My job was to tell the truth and to abide by my agreement. So, again, focusing on my family was protected. That was my main concern. Now I'm in an agreement. I pled guilty to life. My agreement was to tell the truth. I told the truth. I answered all the questions truthfully. That's it. If the agents were able to make 100 people, cases out of 100 people, then they did a good job. If they were able to convict one person, they did what they could. That's not it's not in my control. I don't have any control over that.
Before you started cooperating, what were the charges that you pled guilty to exactly?
I pled guilty to RICO murder, 2 RICO murders, and I think it was 9 or 11 conspiracy to murders. Some people died and some people didn't die. Doesn't make it okay either way. Yeah.
So, how much time do you spend cooperating before the actual sentencing?
Okay, so I was pre-trial for about 2 years before I flipped. And then I got sentenced maybe about 4 years after that. And I got 7 years.
Okay, so you got 6 years that you spend cooperating. And then it goes in front of the judge and the feds say, he cooperated, he helped convict this many people. We would like, some leniency. We don't want him to get life in prison. And ultimately, the judge gave you 7 years.
Yeah, the sentencing judge gave me 7 years.
Now, that's 7 years with the 6 years time served?
No, it wasn't. I had about a year to go.
Okay, got it. So you got 7 years, you've done 6, you got 1 to go.
Right.
And you were given a new identity. You became Frank Capri. Right?
That's right.
And ultimately, after 7 years in prison, they let you out.
Right. They let me out into the witness protection program.
Now, when you get out, there is something called a bat cave. Can you describe what that is?
The bat cave is a place where you transition from, let's say, Frank Gioia to Frank Capri. So everything gets erased. Your social security, your birth, everything. You don't exist anymore.
Okay, so you get relocated to Arizona, and you're now Frank Capri with a totally clean record, clean driver's license, no felonies, no nothing.
Well, there was a lot of stuff that happened between the Batcave and Arizona. Yeah, basically I'm in Arizona, Frank Capri, new social, new identity, new driver's license, new everything. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so once you get to Arizona, you start developing and building homes.
I started working in the car business first, and then I started building homes, yes.
Okay, so did you have a background in construction before then?
Not really. No, I was never in the construction business on the street. I was just in the drug business and, not the construction business, no.
Well, at one point, you actually start to build restaurants that are licensed with the Toby Keith name. And Toby Keith is a famous musician that actually licensed his name for these restaurants. How did you get into that business?
Well, through other businesses, I met different people. And eventually I met Toby Keith's manager, one of his financial managers. And I ultimately went to Toby Keith and put a deal together. It was a licensing agreement.
Okay. So you start actually building these restaurants. Toby Keith's I Love This Bar and Grill. And at one point, you build 20 different restaurants.
It was like 22 restaurants. There was 22 that were open. Another 20 were under construction. And another 20 was signed to come soon after that. So 60 were planned.
Okay, so 22 were built, and there was a bunch more that were supposed to get built. But they say the whole thing was done under a fake company, and there was a bunch of stuff where, they're saying that involved inflating revenue projections and getting money and so forth. Can you explain what that's about?
Well, as you know, I'm on supervised release. I got another 18 months left to go. I can't talk about the case, but what I will say is that, no, I built a legitimate business that was very successful, that thrived in 19 different states, and that I was doing for 10 years. So the rest,
okay.
Eventually I'll be able to talk about it on my podcast. Maybe I'll come back on the show and talk about it with you then if you want me back. But a very interesting story, how I got, second go around.
Well, without going into too many details, ultimately this whole thing ended up crumbling and you got sentenced to 5 years in prison.
That's correct. I was facing 32 years in prison because, again, of the money table. It works just like a drug guideline. And ultimately, I took a plea for 5 years.
Right. You took a 5-year plea, and there were 48 different lawsuits filed in 31 cities. And the judge ordered you to actually pay back $65 million in civil judgments. And there was also there's an $18 million payback and so forth. There's a lot that goes on with this case.
See, what you're reading, again, this is the reason why for my podcast, frankgioiajr.com. The reason why is because of the salacious reporting that was done by the Arizona Republic. And the only reason why it was done because they found out about my past and they could sell newspapers. So because of salacious reportings, and I know you've been involved with lawsuits, Vlad. You know how it works. If you're not being sued, you're not doing business.
That's true.
Okay? So, again, I'll get into the details later on. But I took 5 years because I already had, it was similar to time served. So, take the 5 or risk getting 30.
I mean, what was it like to do 7 years? And how long were you out before you had to go back in again?
20 years.
Okay. So you spent 20 years out. You're used to, living a free life. You have a new identity. You don't have any beef from your previous life. And now suddenly you're back in prison for almost the same amount of time that you had to serve before.
Right.
So how did you get a head around that? Being back in prison again?
Yeah, it's like a nightmare. It's like a bad dream. But, you deal with it, and I had no choice but to deal with it. I fought it. Like I said, got it down to a reasonable number that I could live with. And again, I'll talk about it more on the podcast and later on in the future because I'm still on supervised release. I don't want them to violate me, okay? But, no, the jails, the environment changed as well. That's what was more, the jails back then were totally different than the jails today. The whole landscape changed. Doing time nowadays versus back then.
In what way?
Well, today there's a lot of different, the clientele changed a lot. Back then it was, today there's a bunch of sex offenders. There's different crimes that people are committing with the internet. And there's so much of it, they don't know where to put these people. And before you turn around, there's a lot of sex offenders. There's a lot of people, almost everybody cooperated. There's dropouts. There's a thing called the dropout yards where you drop out from your gang and now you're on a yard. So like years ago, we never had that. We never had a yard where there's sex offenders. We never had a yard where there's a dropout yard, stuff like that.
I mean, when you go back to prison, are you put into a witness protection area as well, or are you in general population?
No, they offered me to go back into the witness protection program with SEC. I chose not to. I went to population.
Okay, so now you're in general population. And what prison were you in during that time?
Out here in Arizona, I was in Florence, which is a county federal holdover. And when I was sentenced, I went to La Tuna, Texas.
Okay, so for the first time, you're in general population, and Italian guys are definitely the minority in prison. I would assume in Texas, it's mostly Mexican, right?
Right.
So were you getting into any situations in terms of violence and so forth? The fact that you're not associated with the mafia anymore, you do have paperwork on you that you cooperated, you're not part of a gang, and things get extremely violent in these situations.
That's correct. Yeah, I did get into situations, but I handled my business. And once, it's really a small community. As long as you fight, win or lose, it's all that matters. But I didn't have to go in there and have to, prove myself. And a couple things happened I won't talk about. And everything was okay after that. But I never had a problem with the Mexicans. The Mexicans were never a problem.
Who'd you have problems with?
The white racist guys. The racist white. And again, nothing. I'm not racist. I'm not saying anything towards that group, but you got some people that are just, their beliefs in it. Just have a different belief.
Well, a lot of times in prison, I mean, you have the gangs, but at the end of the day, from what I was told, was that when, riots break out, it goes along the color lines. This is why I remember I interviewed a high-ranking member from the Hells Angels, and he explained why there's no black Hells Angels, because he explained how there's a lot of Hells Angels in prison, and basically when the fights break out, everyone just goes racially with their group. And if you had a black Hells Angel, he wouldn't know what group to side with, which is why they decided not to have black members. So was the problem with the racist whites is because they wanted you part of their gang and you didn't want to join into that, or was it something else?
Exactly. I didn't go to jail at 55 years old to join a gang. I was in one of the biggest gangs before, okay? If you get involved in the politics, you're going to get yourself in those situations. But I know how to do time. You mind your business. You don't gamble. You don't do drugs. You don't need anybody for anything. You mind your business and you kind of find your way. If you're going to get into politics and you want to flex and you want to do all these things and stuff, yeah, you're going to get yourself into a problem. But I just did a lot of reading. You find a couple, one or two guys to do your time with, and you'll be fine.
Well, the fact that you cooperated against Lucchese, does that mean that you have a hit on you for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
So the fact that you're no longer in witness protection, you're in a Texas prison, people know who you are, and this is an environment where getting somebody stabbed or killed is not usually even that expensive. Was there any concern over your former family putting out a hit on you in prison?
I ran into people when I was in federal prison that were associated with a family. I promised I wouldn't say their names because I don't want to put them on the spot. Because if they would have told somebody they ran into Frank Gioia, they would have told them, what'd you do about it? So I pretty much confronted them and told them I ain't checking in. It's me. I'm not checking in. And we both can't be on the yard. So you need to check in. And they did.
Well, right. For example, I just interviewed John Red Shea, who worked under Whitey Bulger. And we talked about that whole situation, how Whitey cooperated a bunch, against a bunch of people. And then even at like 80 years old, when he was part of a transfer and one of the Boston mob guys had a chance to kill him, they killed him right then and there. And this is an old man in a wheelchair. But the fact that he cooperated and someone had a chance to kill him, knowing they would be caught, knowing they would do life in prison over it, they still did it. So this is a real thing. Whether it's the Boston mob or whether it's the Italian mob, the rules still apply.
Well, you're right. But Hazleton, compared to where I was in an FCI, and eventually I went to a camp, is two different worlds. So, if you're going to go into a prison where guys already have life and they're never getting out, and they could kill a guy like Whitey Bulger and for whatever reason get another notch under their belt, then yeah, you probably, but to an FCI where everybody's trying to go home, everybody is going home, you go to a camp, it's a different clientele.
How did it feel to finally walk out of that prison for the second time?
Oh, it was great. It was almost like a, surreal. Like I just can't believe I went through it again, But I'm blessed because I'm here to talk about it. I'm blessed the fact that it's over and I did my time again and I could talk about it.
Well, your lawyer at the time, Gregory McClure, he was actually caught up in the same case that you were caught up in. And according to reports, he had to pay $1.3 million and he had to give up his law license and now lives in a trailer and works on fences for a living. You heard about this?
Again, I don't want to get into the details of the case, but I will acknowledge what you said. Greg McClure was a lawyer who worked for me directly in-house. But again, to get into the details of the case, I can't get into the details. And again, if I want to talk about it further, click the link in the description.
There you have it. Well, Frank Gioia, man, a hell of a story, a hell of a life. And, you're 58 years old. You still have a lot of years, to live. And I want everyone to check out your podcast because there's a lot of things in this interview that, we didn't get the full details of that you talk about on your actual show. But definitely a fascinating story. And, at the end of the day, everyone's going to have their opinion over what you did, but very few people are put in that situation. So it's easy to say, well, I would never cooperate. I'd let my dad get killed. But if you're actually in the situation where you know that any day your dad's going to get murdered, what would you do? I know what I would do. And, what you did doesn't sound all that different than what I would do myself. So I know a lot of people in the comments are going to say, and the internet's a very interesting place. Everyone's a super gangster. Everyone has these ideals that, nobody else has. But real life is real life. And you've actually went through a real life situation. You were facing life in prison. You were facing a situation where your dad might get murdered. And I ultimately respect your decision, what you did.
I really appreciate that, Vlad. It goes a long ways with me. And like I said, my father now, he's 76 years old. God bless him. He's in good health. Mission accomplished.
There you have it. Well, Frank Gioia Jr., appreciate you coming on Vlad TV. And I want everyone to check out the link to your podcast. It's below on all the YouTube videos. And until next time.
I appreciate you. Nice meeting you.
No doubt. You as well. Peace.